The world is currently sitting on $335 trillion in debt. Every government, every corporation, every household combined. $335 trillion. But how did this happen? For decades, governments, businesses, and even ordinary people kept borrowing to grow, to survive, to keep the system moving. Cheap money made it easy, low interest rates made it feel safe, and slowly, quietly, the debt kept stacking up. Crisis after crisis, from 2008 to the pandemic, pushed it even higher. But here's the question nobody asks. If everyone's broke, who's actually writing the check? Think of debt like borrowing $10 from a friend. You need it, they have it, and you promise to pay it back. But not just $10, you pay back $12. That extra $2 is the price of borrowing. It's called interest. Now imagine every country on earth doing that same thing. But instead of $10, they're borrowing hundreds of billions to build roads, to keep hospitals running, to pay their own citizens when the economy falls apart. And just like you with your friend, every single one of them promised to pay it back with interest. Do that across every government, every company, and every household on the planet for decades? And the interest stacks on top of the borrowing, which stacks on top of more borrowing, which stacks on top of more interest. That is how you get to $335 trillion, not from just one country, but from every corner of the world, borrowing and promising to pay back more than they took for generations. And it all breaks down into three separate piles. $335 trillion isn't one massive pile of debt, it's three separate piles stacked on top of each other. First, government debt. Every country has borrowed to fund a war, build infrastructure, or keep its economy breathing during a crisis. The US alone sits at over $38 trillion. Combine every government on Earth, and you're looking at roughly $111 trillion. Then there's corporate debt. Companies borrow constantly to build factories, make acquisitions, and cover payroll when cash flow tightens. Another over $100 trillion. And then the one that actually surprises people: household debt, mortgages, car loans, student loans, credit cards. Regular people all over the world collectively owe close to $64 trillion. Added up, $335 trillion, a number that has more than doubled since 2008. After the financial crisis that was supposed to teach the world a lesson about over-borrowing, the world borrowed twice as much. So who's on the other side of all this? Let's start with the most obvious answer: banks. These institutions lend out far more money than they actually hold in deposits. It sounds impossible, but it's exactly how modern banking was designed to work. Banks are required to keep only a fraction of deposits on hand. The rest gets deployed into business loans, mortgages, and government bonds. Commercial banks collectively hold tens of trillions in outstanding loans at any given moment. But commercial banks aren't even close to the biggest player. That title belongs to central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan. These institutions don't just regulate money, they create it. And after 2008, and again after 2020, they created it at a scale the world had never seen before. The Fed alone expanded its balance sheet from under $1 trillion before the 2008 financial crisis to over $9 trillion by 2022. $9 trillion in government bonds and mortgage-backed securities purchased by the Fed, making it one of the US government's single largest creditors. What does that actually look like in practice? The Fed created digital dollars, not physical bills, but electronic entries, and used them to buy bonds from banks and financial institutions across the country. In doing so, it flooded the financial system with liquidity and pushed interest rates to near zero for years. The theory was straightforward. Cheap money encourages borrowing, borrowing encourages spending, and spending drives the economy forward. And for a while, it worked. Asset prices soared, unemployment fell, But when inflation surged in 2022 and the Fed was forced to begin reversing course, raising rates at the fastest pace in 40 years, every government, corporation, and household that had borrowed during the cheap money era suddenly found the bill had arrived, and it was larger than anyone had planned for. A central bank lending money to its own government, printed from nothing, backed by trust, and that trust is the only thing keeping the entire system from unraveling. Now, this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Once you understand who the lenders are, one question changes everything. What do they actually want in return? Because central banks want economic control, pension funds want a guaranteed yield, and foreign governments, they want something far more valuable than interest payments. They want leverage. Beyond banks, there's a category of lender most people have never considered: sovereign wealth funds. Countries with enormous trade surpluses, Norway, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, accumulate more foreign currency than they know what to do with, so they build funds, investment vehicles designed to park this wealth and grow it. Norway's government pension fund, the largest in the world, manages over $2.2 trillion in assets. Much of that sits in bonds, meaning Norway is quietly lending money to governments and corporations across every continent. But the most politically charged version of the story involves two countries you already know. Japan and China are the two largest foreign holders of US government debt. Japan holds over $1.2 trillion in US Treasury bonds. China holds almost $700 billion. Let that sit for a moment. China, geopolitically at odds with the United States on nearly every front, is one of its biggest creditors. The world's two most powerful economies are financially entangled in a way that makes the idea of true independence almost meaningless. And this didn't happen by accident. It was built deliberately. After China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, its exports to the United States exploded. For every dollar Americans spend on Chinese goods, China received dollars in return. But to stop its own currency from rising in value, which would have made those exports more expensive and less competitive, China needed to recycle those dollars back into the global financial system. And the safest, most liquid place to park them was US Treasury bonds. So that's exactly what they did, year after year, decade after decade. It was a feedback loop that funded American consumption and powered Chinese manufacturing simultaneously. For 20 years, both sides benefited enormously. The question now, as relations fracture over trade, technology, and Taiwan, is how long either side can afford to keep playing the game. If China were to rapidly dump its US Treasury holdings, it would flood the bond market, drive up interest rates, and send shockwaves through the US economy. But here's the catch. Doing so would also destroy the value of the bonds China holds before it can sell them. Both nations are holding each other hostage. Neither can pull the trigger without shooting itself in the foot. And then there's the layer that almost everyone overlooks: pension funds. The money your employer sets aside for your retirement doesn't sit in a vault, it gets invested. And one of the most reliable, predictable investments pension funds make? Government bonds, essentially lending money to governments in exchange for guaranteed interest. Pension funds globally manage over $55 trillion in assets. A significant portion of that is lent out as debt. Every time someone thinks about their retirement, they are unknowingly thinking about a piece of this $335 trillion. Insurance companies operate the same way. They collect your premiums. They need to invest that money somewhere safe so they can pay claims when they arrive. Government bonds are their foundation. Trillions in fixed income assets, a quiet, invisible corner of the lending machine. And finally, you. If you own a bond ETF, a bond mutual fund, or any index fund with fixed income exposure inside a retirement account, you are lending money to governments. You are a creditor. You are one of the thousands of small cogs turning inside the $335 trillion machine too. So now that you know who's lending, why does it actually matter to you? Here's the reality. $335 trillion in debt doesn't just sit there quietly. Every single dollar of it comes with interest, and in a world where interest rates have surged after more than a decade near zero, the cost of servicing that debt has exploded. The United States government now spends more money on interest payments every single year than it does on its entire military budget. That's not a warning about the future. That is already happening right now. And here's what makes it worse. Debt at this scale never really gets paid off. It gets rolled over. Old debt matures, new debt gets issued to replace it. The music keeps playing. Think about what that actually means in practice. Imagine the US government borrowed $1 trillion at 1.5% interest back in 2020. That debt is now maturing. To pay it back, the government issues new bonds, but today those bonds carry interest rates closer to 4.5%. The same debt now costing 3 times as much to service every single year. Multiply that dynamic across every government, every corporation, every institution that locked in ultra-cheap debt during the zero-rate era, and you begin to understand the scale of what is already underway. The International Monetary Fund has warned that as this debt gets repriced at higher rates through the late 2020s, governments will face a brutal choice: cut public spending, raise taxes, or borrow even more just to stay afloat. None of those options are painless, and all of them land on ordinary people first. The question that no politician wants to answer is, what happens when the music stops? When lenders demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk they're taking? When foreign governments decide American debt is no longer the safe haven it once was? When pension funds are forced to sell bonds en masse to pay out an aging population that's retiring faster than new workers are paying in? Each one of those scenarios is already beginning to unfold. Not in theory, in real time. $335 trillion in debt. And behind every dollar of it, a bank, a government, a pension fund, a sovereign wealth fund in Norway, or a mutual fund sitting quietly inside your retirement account. The world isn't in debt to some abstract force, it's in debt to itself.